A very, very good evening. A warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. Welcome to somewhere you might remember from about this time last year, because for the second year running, we are bringing you Dan Really Likes Wine from one of the more rarefied golf venues, not just in South Africa, but on the planet. This is the River Club, and this in particular is the cellar at the River Club. It is a very exclusive golf course, but a really cool golf course. Beautiful one to play, and one that has got a very keen finger on the pulse of social requirements, which is why today it is very proud to host, together with the Mlangeni family, the Give Back For Mandela Day. And this is a day when golfers from across Johannesburg play a total of 27 holes of golf, which speaks to the 27 years that Madiba spent behind bars, and through the course of the day raise money and support a number of very, very good causes. And so Dan Really Likes Wine is here, happy to support. I'll be hosting the dinner and auction a little later on this evening, and we'll also be doing some wine tasting, and that wine tasting relates to exactly the wine that we have on the show today. Now, you might recall from previous shows we've had that Madiba was not a great wine drinker. He did like a little bit of sweet wine, I think, if memory serves, but he does have a very strong link to a couple of wines in particular. And it is those wines that we shall explore in some exalted company, because joining us on the show, and doubtless looking as splendid as ever, he owns the best collection of shirts in the winelands, Pieter Bubbles Ferreira, the godfather of all things sparkling in South Africa. Also joining us alongside of Mr. Ferreira will be one of the greats of South African wine, the very first Cape wine master, a guy by the name of Benny Howard. And Benny will be on the show. And we're also hoping a little later, Mukle Morase from Epicurean, who are part of today's events, will be joining us as well. He has some new vintages to celebrate. So it's all things Madiba through the prism of wine here at the River Club today. Before we meet our guests, say hello to Bubbles and to Benny, and a little later to Mukle. Let's have a quick look at the latest wine news. So this was a really cool event yesterday, thanks to the team at Champagne Lanzon and Great Domains, the importers of Champagne Lanzon, the chance to be Spanish for the afternoon and cheer on a remarkable performance from Carlos Alcaraz at centre court, winning Wimbledon for the second year running and putting Novak Djokovic to the sword as never seen before. Alcaraz did have competition, though, as did Djokovic, for star attraction, because the Lanzon was drinking beautifully that 2012. As with all of the French houses, they don't make a vintage specific every year, but in the years they really enjoy, they'll bring out something special. And very kindly, the Lanzon team brought this out yesterday, and it proved a very good partner to an afternoon of tennis in the park in Johannesburg. Thankfully not too cold, and a reminder of some really good French champagne. In fact, French champagne that is so good, it's almost as good as the stuff Pieter Ferreira makes at Graham Beck, which we'll be tasting a little later. And then this was a little earlier on in the week down in Cape Town, and in Stellenbosch in particular, which is a wind and rain swept place at the moment. A restaurant I hadn't been to, but I had heard plenty of. It had won the top new restaurant at the Lux Restaurant Awards. And more pertinently, both Mike Radcliffe, who spends most of his life checking out great restaurants and reporting back diligently, along with Darren Bardenhorst, the Le Coin Francais chef, amongst others, all said this, Dan, is somewhere you need to go. And so go I did with Michael Jordan, my junior director of Dan Really Likes Wine. We had the opportunity to try the pairing menu and to run through the 5 courses with the wine. A word for Kudzai, the sommelier, who was outstanding, but technically very precise, but also a real feel for the passion of wine. You can see the selection there. Genevieve's Bubbles, that's made out of a Syrah, some Art of Chardonnay from Creation, and from the same maker, the Katza Snor, Gerard Smith, who makes wine at Creation, but also has his own range, and that's a really cool label on his Pinot Noir. We delved into some of the mint from Thelema, the 21 vintage, which as a vintage as a whole is just getting better and better, but which also has just such a high spot in the rankings of Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon. We had some Gewürztraminer from Delheim, and a bit of Syrah from Kimont. It made for a very indulgent, very enjoyable afternoon. The food was outstanding. The service was brilliant. The space is beautiful. Next time you are in Stellenbosch, put Mersha very high up on your to-do list. This is coming up with Murati. They do some really cool events, and this is going to be a lot of fun. The Retro Rouge event at the end of July, the 27th, to be specific. Your chance to spend the day at their Winter Wine Festival, drinking all sorts of wine. They, Murati, they do have a habit of bringing out one or two slightly older wines. They also have a habit of throwing a hell of a good party. If you are interested, head over to Murati's website, and they'll have some details for you to jump into. And while we're on the subject of Stellenbosch, the Stellenbosch Wine Festival, I'm going to be down there with my chiseled Portuguese director of production, Ronaldo, as we go and check out a whole pile of top wine estates. That whole week is going to be a very busy one indeed, but the wine festival in particular at Winetown Stellenbosch on the Friday and Saturday will be very busy. I won't be there on the Saturday. Instead, I will be writing exams for WSET 3, but right the way from the Monday through to the Sunday, all sorts of cool stuff happening. There are great travel packages if you're from outside of the Cape and you'd like to go down for the week. Lots of the hotels are doing big discounts, and there are really good food and wine offerings throughout Stellenbosch. Your best plan, head over to the Stellenbosch Wine Routes website, have a look through what is going on, and get a feel for a really great celebration of one of the great wine destinations of the world. All right, well, back to the River Club, back to a cellar I'd happily be locked in for hours. There's a terrific collection of both French, Italian, Spanish wine to go with the South African. In fact, if I look just in front of me, I plucked this. Andy Bean, if you're watching, I'm not drinking this. He's the GM. I just borrowed it from the ranks. This is some Marqués de Riscal, some top Rioja. 2019 feels a bit young to be drinking Rioja. I merely pulled it because yesterday was a rather good day for Spanish sport, whether you're a tennis fan or a football fan. Not quite so good if you're Serbian or English. But instead of drinking this, as appropriate would be, I've got some great South African wine to drink, and I've got some great company, albeit virtually, to join me with the drinking of that wine. So let me say hello to two proper rock stars of South African wine. Bubbles Ferreira joins me, as does Benny Howard. Gentlemen, lovely to have you both with us. Thank you for joining us again on the show. Peter, it's been a little while. Benny, I think our last interaction was recorking some wine going back to the 1960s, and what a treat that was, not just for the wine itself, but because whenever I spend time with you, Benny, I feel like I'm getting a most welcome lecture on the history and heritage of South African wine. And we're going to draw on some of your vast knowledge in just a moment. I would, though, like you to set the scene, if you will, because you're still very hands-on in the wine production business. From my weather app, it looks like you've had a little bit of drizzle for a day or two over the last while in Cape Town. Tell me about this deluge of rain and what sort of impact that has on the winelands and how you deal with it.
Well, I must be honest, it is about 10 or 15 years since I've seen such a number of storms coming through the Cape. We talk about a perskereën in the Cape if we have 7 days of non-stop rain. And according to my counting, we are now on day 9, but we luckily had some sun today. But I've just looked at the weather forecast. There's still a few drops coming until Saturday for us. So it's almost 2 weeks of rain. But then the fantastic thing is that the vines, they need wet conditions during winter, and other than the wet conditions, cold conditions. So we've seen both of that in an abundance. I measured here at my house in Somerset West, very close to 250 millimeters rain in the past week. And the night temperatures all went down to below 10. And in other parts of the winelands, the temperatures went down even lower than that. And that's what the vine needs. The roots need to go to sleep. They need to have a proper rest with cold. I love that sound. They must be under cold conditions and lots of rain and wet lands around them to make sure that they sleep properly. So when we wake up in springtime, that they are well rested to produce the next crop for us. So altogether, from a wine growing perspective, this is really, really something very special. And we are very thankful because also the dams are almost all full and ready for the summer season to come.
Hard to believe that it's not that long ago we were talking about day zero and the state of critical drought in the Western Cape. The sound you heard, Benny, which of course you are most familiar with, was a cork popping out of a bottle. What bottle was it? Well, I'll show you in just a moment with some guidance from Benny. He is one half of our star duo today. The other is Bubbles Ferreira. Peter, very warm welcome to you. Lovely to have you back on the show. We've heard there from Benny on the impact of the weather of the last little while. Does that have the same benefit for those of you who specialize in the art of making world-class bubbles?
Yeah, I think, Benny, it's lovely. But Dan, thank you for the invitation again. Benny hit the nail on the head. It's all about cold units. And, it's come very, very late in the winter. But as Benny has alluded, a lot of water has fallen, which is really great. We've had snow-capped mountains all around us in Robertson, which is completely first class for the vines to have a good rest. And the cold units help dormancy. And it really promises for a beautiful spring break, which will happen towards September. So really great. You heard about many, many rainfalls, but in our catchment area, which one of them is the Slanghoek Valley in Rawsonville, had 700 millimeters of rain. And that's why the Breda River is in full flood again. It's again broken the 100-year flood level line. So, yeah, but fortunately, I think we knew the water was coming. So I think the farmers were much more prepared, seeing we had two big storms last year.
At what point does this go beyond, okay, this can help set the scene for a great vintage for 2025? And do you and your viticulturalists start going, well, this might be a bit much, this could be problematic, this is starting to actually do some structural damage and having a negative impact?
Well, fortunately, I feel really for the farmers much closer to the river lines and things like that, where the water levels seem to rise and always go over. But if you are slightly away from it, it's really great reserves. Our vineyards, you can actually see, although there's no leaves, they're definitely smiling within themselves. And we're looking forward to the 2025 vintage.
All right, I suspect you might want to start on premiering in as much as we do that in South Africa and having a look ahead to 2025. Today, though, in principle, we're looking back some distance. The bottle that I opened that Benny picked up immediately is one of the bottles we're talking about, and we will in a second. But I want to start with a story that's not new to Dan Really Likes Wine, but which I love hearing Peter retell, and which always has an added dimension to it every time we speak about it. And that is a bottle that led so much to the legend of Graham Beck, because it put you on the map in a global way, which even you, Peter, the eternal optimist, could never have quite anticipated, I'm sure. And this revolves around not one, but two men of consequence in terms of international statehood. Let's start with the first one. And the fact that you were able, when the great Nelson Mandela was inaugurated, to find your way onto the wine list for that particular evening, and add a touch of Graham Beck effervescence to a grand occasion.
Yeah, every time I tell this, there's goosebumps that does come, and there's happy and fond memories. The wine we're really talking about today is the 1994, as you can see there. Hopefully you can see it. It's a Chardonnay Pinot Noir, which was released in actually September 1993, as our maiden vintage was 1991 in Robertson. And we were very fortunate that our Cup Classique was chosen for the inauguration for Nelson Mandela. And yeah, you're right, Dan. It's really put Graham Beck on the map, and it really gave it an international flavor from day one. The timing wouldn't have been more perfect than it was. But then again, Graham Beck was a complete guy who had sort of guts and determination, and it was all about timing for him, and he knew he was going to release his wine at the right time. So our wine was used for Nelson Mandela's inauguration in Pretoria. And that story just, we could not go anywhere but tell the story. So, yeah, it's really great and fun memories. And we still happily look back at the 94 vintage. And to our surprise, it's still alive and it's drinking beautifully.
I had some of it not too long ago, and I concur entirely with that sentiment. It's such a vitality to that particular wine. And without getting too esoteric, I think there was definitely a touch of the spirit of Madiba coming into play to keep that wine going for as long as it has. It's not the end of the story, but let me jump across while we're on the topic of that great inauguration, because Benny Howard, it is not just Graham Beck, it's not just Pieter Ferreira on the show today that had a hand in that dinner, because you also had a quiet influence on what was drunk that night.
Yes, I would like to agree with Peter that it is goosebump story time. At the time, I was quite close to a number of the big events in South Africa, also on the political side. And I offered at that stage a very special wine close to my heart as well. And that was a wine from the Nederburg auction, of which I was for a very great part of my life manager and could have tasted all those beautiful wines. But there was a particular wine from Nederburg, the 1982 Nederburg Cabernet that came in magnums as well. And Dave Hughes and myself and Dapey Bailey, we thought that would be the appropriate wine to offer for the inauguration of Nelson Mandela. And they accepted our offer to take the magnums. And the feedback that we had afterwards was that the guests from all around the world were very impressed, like there was a great feeling in the room for South Africa that night to drink a wine of that stature made by the famous Günter Brezel, and a wine which also showcased, I think, the beauty of the variety of Cabernet Sauvignon, one of my favorite varieties, and a wine that could not be better for an occasion like that. And I must be honest with you, we all know that Mr. Mandela was not that fond of white wine and red wine, but I was very happy to meet him very soon after that period of the jubilation in South Africa. And being Xhosa speaking myself, I could address him in his own language when I met him. And that set a very special friendship between me and Mr. Mandela. And he said to me, "Don't you have something sweet for me to drink?" And the best wine that I could think of at the Nederburg auction at that stage was the Nederburg Edelkeer. And we offered that to him every year on his birthday. And I was always so happy to receive back a handwritten note from him to say, "Thank you for my Edelkeer." And, you know, if I listened to the comments that came back from people around him that said that was his very special wine, and it was always just a small sip so that the bottle could last longer.
I do hope, Benny, that you've kept those notes from Madiba.
Yes, they are in my collection.
What a collection that must be. I love the history that so often surfaces on this show. That kind of story, though, is right up there with the best that we have. The stories aren't done, though, because if we jump back to Pieter Ferreira, and we talk back about these bubbles, you probably thought that was the high point of the Graham Beck story, or at least the only story of its kind that you might be able to tell. But that changed quite dramatically and quite serendipitously, Peter, when you happened to be sitting in a restaurant in Chicago, showing some wine to a sommelier, and all of a sudden, something quite dramatic impacted on you, on your story, and where Graham Beck was subsequently able to go.
Yeah, Dan, you're completely right. The first time we went to the US, which was 2004, we always thought as winemakers, wow, now we have an opportunity to really speak about the pH and the specificness of the blends. And I realized in day two, my God, nobody really is interested in the specific dynamics and the real attention to detail. They wanted to hear stories. So I changed my sort of point of view when I went to the US and walked the streets. And I really, I said, well, there's only one story that is really true to the brand, and that was President Nelson Mandela's story of using it at the inauguration and how special it was. And as soon as I changed my tune to the story of Nelson Mandela enjoying it at his inauguration, the Americans loved it. I really didn't know that they loved Madiba so much, and it made a huge impact. And as you said, rightfully said, in 2007, I was for the first time in Chicago, and I presented to a sommelier, and I told him immediately the story of the inauguration, and he said, "Stop right there. I have the right clientele. I'm going to introduce this wine. You know what? I'm going to use it by the glass, and I know they're going to love it." And lo and behold, one of the clients was Barack Obama. He just was declared as the Democratic candidate for the presidency. And this was in February 2008. And they walked into the private room in the restaurant, and they were served by the sommelier each a glass of Graham Beck, and they said, "Please enjoy this beautiful sparkling wine. It was used at Nelson Mandela's inauguration." And that was a turnaround. It was massive. It was massive. And we know for a fact that Michelle instructed the Secret Service to find as many Graham Becks in the early days of November 2008, and they obviously used that as a private celebration before Barack went on to Grants Park to do the inaugurational speech.
I just have this wonderful vision of whatever Chicago's equivalent of Norman Goodfellows is being raided by large men in black suits, sunglasses, and earpieces, demanding to know where all the Graham Beck was, to the bemusement of whoever was running the store. Look, it shows that President Obama and the First Lady had exquisite taste, and it added this wonderful layer of legacy to what you do. And that sense of legacy is so important to this show this week as we celebrate Mandela Day. It would have been Madiba's birthday this coming Thursday, and we look back at the extraordinary impact he had through the vision of wine. And that impact kicks off in so many ways for South Africa 30 years ago, 1994, when South Africa began its new story and its new chapter. And that, Benny, links to the wine which you heard me pop the cork of earlier, and which I do have here, and that is some 1994 Chateau Libertas. And two things I love about this wine, Benny. One is just how brilliantly it's held 30 years later. It doesn't show any sign of age. It's still much like the bubbles we spoke of earlier from 1994 from Graham Beck. So this red equivalent has got a youthfulness to it that defies belief. but also because there is an inherently blue-collar feel to this wine. This is a brand that today many of the wine snobs might think twice before trying, because it doesn't sit up in the top price point echelons, and yet this is still a wine that is such an important part, Benny, of our fabric and our history of South African wine.
Absolutely. I think if you ever ask anybody who loves red wine and has a taste for it with good food, but also just with friends around you, it will be a Chateau Libertas. One of our oldest trademarks on the South African market, going back to 1932, made for the first time by the Winshaws, who started up Stellenbosch Farmers Winery already way back in the 1920s, in 1925. And it was a Bordeaux blend style of wine. And I'm saying that on purpose because the grape varieties from Bordeaux were not available in South Africa. We had at that stage mainly Cabernet Sauvignon and Cinsault. And that was the cornerstone of the success of Chateau Libertas in its youth, going on for many, many years, becoming one of the famous wines on the Blue Train, being served on the lovely Union Castle ships that went past our coast for many, many years. But it was also on all the main wine lists in South Africa. And from the time that I joined the wine business a few years ago, it became one of obviously the favorite wines of my house. And once we tasted from the Tabernacle, and you've had the opportunity to showcase that to your viewers, some of the old Chateau Libertases from the Tabernacle cellar in Stellenbosch, you know, the 1960s were great. The 1950s, the few bottles that were still there that we opened during the years were fantastic. But my memory of the 1940 Chateau Libertas will always be a memory of not only happiness and pleasure and a palate that just speaks to you and that just lingers on and on, but it also said something about the boldness of our industry. If we think back, the kind of wines that were made in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s in our country. And luckily, we could find those bottles being reserved at the cellars of Stellenbosch Farmers Winery and to taste them. I mean, it is a absolute marvelous occasion, and I can recall every bottle that I have opened over the years for special guests at the Tabernacle, but also in the recorking of some of those bottles. It is just amazing. Now, going back to 1994, or maybe I must first say that the blend stayed more or less the same with Cinsault, Cabernet Sauvignon, and when Shiraz came around a little bit later in the early 40s, there was a touch of Shiraz in it as well. And I remember that Ronnie Melk told me once that if they were looking for a little bit of color in the years that there was not enough color from the red grapes, they would also look at the touch of Pontac, which is a grape variety that has red juice. So it has a very intense color. But when we came around the early 1990s, obviously the brand was a big brand, and they were looking at an extension of what to do with the fruit based flavors of Chateau Libertas, and the Merlot was the first component that we could look at as another grape variety from Bordeaux to add into it. So if we look at 1994, and I mean it was a special year for all of us. I think we celebrated right through 1994, the new South Africa, and everything that happened in the wine industry, the new markets that opened for us so rapidly and so quickly that we could hardly touch base. But Chateau Libertas that year said, let us make a wine that is true to the to the tradition of blending red wine, putting the best components together and then bottle it and see what will happen to it. And little did we know that the winemakers that worked together in those days, Jan de Waal and Wouter Pienaar and John Winshaw and a number of other very talented wine buyers and winemakers that got the wine together that we now have in the bottle and which you are so lucky to have a sip of. But it is a wine that lasted 30 years and showed its finesse, but at the same time, the youthfulness of it. And maybe there's something in that wine that also says something to us today, and that is we should treasure the development of a red wine in the bottle. It brings maturity, it brings flavor, and it brings happiness over many years of being in the bottle. And I'm very proud that that 1994 Chateau Libertas has lasted so well as an expression of what happened in our country in 1994. So there are still some bottles available at the Bergkelder Vinotheek. So if people would like to get hold of it, I keep on selling it on behalf of my friends there. I think it is a unique wine that has stayed so fresh and is so typical South African red wine.
It's also a wine that featured in the very first edition of the Dan Really Likes Wine Selection, our monthly white and red boxes, or both if you like them, that went out. And it was very much the star attraction, going back 30 years to a year, which just had so much going on for it for South Africa, led by Madiba. The wine story, a small part, but for those of us in the industry, a very important part. And it is just so good 3 decades on to be able to celebrate it with lots of friends. I see Annie Podgieter, one of my classmates, doing WSET3, watching the show at the moment, getting goosebumps at that story told about Barack Obama a little earlier on in the show. Also see the Kulu Fine Wines team watching Mondays. The only good thing, your show is the only good thing about Mondays. That's on Instagram. Thank you, guys. Anne Ferreira also watching the show, amongst many others. So thank you for that. We trust you're enjoying a very special edition in celebration of Mandela Day later this week. This is the Give Back to Mandela Day at the River Club with the Mlangeni family. And it's been a joy to be part of it, and a joy to chat to our 2 stars. We're hoping to see Mukle Mogase from Epicurean before the show is done. But I will head back to Pieter Ferreira because the story's still not done. We've had the story of Madiba in the inauguration. We've had the story of being able to take this wine to America, find the glass of Barack Obama, and see this wine at his inauguration. And all of that together, Peter, afforded you the opportunity to take this brand even further and to do things with it that I think you probably needed, this kind of brand collateral to be able to do. And probably top of that list is the bottle I have here. This is the Cuvée Clive. This is really as good as it gets when it comes to the Graham Beck offering. It is not an inexpensive one, as it should not be. It's still a lot cheaper than many of the great champagnes, and yet the quality every bit as good and more so. Tell me a bit about this Cuvée Clive, Peter, and the story that led up to allowing you to produce this bottle, which I think in our conversations in the past, you've always said that you feel is the greatest possible expression of what you do at Graham Beck.
Yeah, Dan. It's the journey continues. I remind all the young winemakers out there that I'm still at nursery school. I'm just got so much to learn still. So I hope I can keep the young winemakers on their toes. Through the build-up of our beautiful brand, I think the most sensible thing we ever did was when we approached the board of directors in 2014 and told them, guys, we couldn't be everything to everyone. We were doing still wines by then. We were having a beautiful range of cutlery. And we just realized, through a little bit of soul searching, that we have to concentrate on what we could do best. So we approached the board of directors in 2014 and said, from 2016, after the little transition, we would love to only do Cup Classique. And that really gave us the foundation to really lead by example. We always say we will never be the biggest producer, but we will always be the better producer. And with that in mind, obviously, Cuvée Clive is our pinnacle. It's not the golf ball, by the way, but it's the pinnacle of our portfolio. And it is really, it's a wine that's got no rules. If we as a winemaking team, and it's really just myself and Pierre de Klerk, who's been with Graham Beck for 14 years. If we get the goosebumps, as I alluded to much earlier, or his neck hair starts to rise, that's the point of discussion, and that is where Cuvée Clive is born. So although it's our pinnacle, we have in certain vintages have stood proud to say there is no Cuvée Clive for the year, as we believe it should be really, really the best, very best expression of Cup Classique that we can take into the international market. So Clive was one of the Beck sons, and I think true to the history of our wine experience, that we've had family names attached to it, Cuvée Clive is our purest expression of Cup Classique in our portfolio. So, yeah, I guess I can have a show just on Cuvée Clive because there is so much to tell. Just for instance, with the amount of attention to detail that we give during harvest, we will have up to 200 individual components, and the selection could be one of them. It could be 3, 4, or 7. It really depends on what the vintage gives us.
The fact that you're able to produce this kind of wine with this kind of care and attention and time, which is such a critical component of all wine, but particularly with fine bubbles, fine champagne, fine Cup Classique, and able to do so at what in South Africa is a not inconsiderable price, says to me that our understanding as an audience, as wine drinkers in South Africa, has reached a point of maturity where there is enough of a critical mass to say, yep, we accept that this is this good. We know why it's this good. We're happy to pay this amount because it can take the place of what we might spend on a top champagne. And not saying that these are competing, but I think the perception and understanding is that we now do bubbles that well. Is that a fair assessment, Pieter, of where you think the South African Cup Classique audience is now at?
Dan, you hit it on the number. It's really I've been with the Beck family 36 years. It's really been an amazing journey, and I finally have sufficient confidence to show this wine anywhere in the world to any best sommelier or whoever, and would gladly blind taste this wine against the prestige cuvées from anywhere in the world. And I know for a fact it speaks truly and uniquely South African, and it speaks the very best Graham Beck has to offer. So I love your reference to maturity. I think we've all grown up to understand and respect South African quality, and that we can stand up to the very best in the world.
That's the kind of endorsement we want to hear from people like Pieter Ferreira. Let's look for one other line of endorsement. Benny, as you look back over the 30 years that are represented, encapsulated in the bottle of Chateau Libertas that we're drinking here now, and we'll be drinking a little later at the dinner we have here at the River Club for Mandela Day. how much progress, and I know it's a broad question, but how much progress do you feel we've made as a wine industry? And are we ahead of the game, maybe not as far as you would have liked, based on the 3 decades that we're looking back on?
Dan, let me first say congratulations to all our Cup Classique producers in South Africa. I want to echo Pieter's words, because I think as a style of sparkling wine from a country that is producing such amazing wines altogether, the Cup Classiques have showcased South Africa's beauty and the talent of our winemakers. And I want to congratulate them for where they are. I am proudly serving only South African bubbles when I have a function that I need to present. And I presume we can taste the best from around the world, but when it comes to the drinking, we drink South African. To back to your question, I think the development of the industry in terms of production from the vineyard through to the cellars, through to bottling, through to labeling, through to label development has been really majestic over the past 30 years. If we look back to the 30 years prior to 1994 and we see what happened then, and we see the explosion that our industry has gone through in the past 30 years, it is quite amazing. And it sometimes also reminds me of the technological development that we've seen in the past number of years. If we think where we came from telex machines in the 60s and the 70s, to fax machines, and now today, whatever you want to do on your cell phone or on your laptop, how amazing that technology is. I think we see something of that in the wine industry, except that we are working with Mother Nature, which is the most fascinating part of making wine. And I want to refer back to the 94 vintage. That was a superb vintage. Like Pieter says, in some years they don't produce the Cuvée Clive, because that is what Mother Nature gives you. But I think 1994 was that very special year that produced some of the most amazing white wines and red wines in South Africa. But if I look back how that has enthused the young winemakers from that stage, which are now not all that young anymore, they are now all 30 years older later, but it has grown our industry into magnificent wines, whether it is wines from single vineyards, from vineyards that are part of our heritage vineyards of 35 years and older, whether it is new varieties that we are working with. There has been a real explosion of quality and of diversity in our winemaking. I am very proud to see how our industry has grown. And there are still pockets that we find that we should get better and do better, and everybody is working at it. Whether it is from the nurseries, creating our rootstocks and our stock to grow into the new plantings, through to cellar technology, through to the use of oak, right through to every bit and piece. The enthusiasm and the amazing passion that we have as South African wine people, I think, has shown up in the past 30 years. I am almost at the stage where I say there are not enough days in the year to taste all the South African wines and to drink the wines that you like. So it has been, for me, a journey of amazing pleasure on the palate, on the nose, but also to share this with people around the world. I cannot think of a overseas visitor that has been with me in the past 30 years that did not comment about the fact that our wines are really, truly international standards and of the best. And I have a number of journalists and judges that come out to the Veritas Awards every year, and they taste with us these amazing wines, and they say, wow, South Africa, you have arrived, but don't just rest on your laurels. Let us be better and better every year.
We could have Benny Howard on the show every single week, the poet laureate of South African wine. We could have Pieter Ferreira on the show every week. He is that entertaining. And we would have Mukle Magase on the show every week, except he plays golf 8 times a week, or is otherwise in Bordeaux drinking wine. A late arrival, Mukle, but lovely to have you on the show. Benny, Pieter, don't go away just yet, but I do want to say warm welcome. Somebody's not just a great friend, but also a great member of our wine industry. I believe you signed for 67 out on the golf course today, so congratulations. Playing well. That's one happy space.
I wish.
This is another, and I welcome you. I know we've got some of your wine to try very quickly in a second, but I wanted you to try this and see if you approve of the wine that I've been chatting to Benny about. We're celebrating Mandela Day today with the Mlangeni family here at the River Club. And before we jump into some Epicurean, which is your fabulous brand, where the wine and the story delight in equal measure, we've got something that goes back to, I think, when you were still at primary school, Mugler, because this is 1994, and we're drinking some Chateau Libertas, and it's a wine that's not just from a very important year, but as Benny has been saying on the show, a brand that's such an important part of our heritage. And I know that wine history and wine heritage is a particular point of interest for you.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. There's no way I could play that kind of golf by any chance. Yeah, but I'm really, this is really showing beautifully, this wine, and I'm glad. What I've seen is the rediscovery of old South African wines, because when I was at university, Chateau Libertas was just kind of like a student wine, but now the seriousness of the wine has come through over the last 20 years, actually. So the first really old Chateau Libertas that I had was, I think, I can't remember what vintage it was, but quite an old vintage with Son. And I've seen the resurgence of the appreciation of our old wines.
And you are a real student of wine. I'm doing my WSET 3 exams at the moment, which puts me several levels below the Mukle Magase level of understanding and appreciation, because you just have such a great passion for this space. When you discover a wine like this, when you get to time travel, it does give a kind of magic that it's hard for anything else to replicate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had the privilege of drinking really old wines. We opened a 1928 Margaux a few weeks ago. And this time travel, this time capsule that you enjoy is a real privilege. You know? So the 94, struggled in the rest of the world, but yeah, this is really stunning wine.
All right. Well, I'm very glad I get to share it with you, because I always enjoy sharing wine with you.
This is an absolute treat.
Well, cheers. And I'm glad you're enjoying it, because it's one of two. The other wine I've got here, and I think it's wine that Benny and Pieter would enjoy as well. This is your project, and not only is it your wine, but it's your wine from a rather important vintage, because 2015, aside from being such a good South African vintage, was also the first year of the Give Back to Mandela Golf Day. So celebrating a decade of your good friends, the Mlangenis, having this day, and doing so with wine from Epicurean, and wine which I know when you set out to make this, and you roped in Skulk Willem Gilbert to help you in the early days of the project, and your wine drinking friends, Moss, as well as the Minister of Wine, and you came together. One of the things you really wanted to do was create a wine that you'd never released terribly early, and that had that potential to tell stories for many years to come.
Yes, I think the Epicurean project has really turned out beyond our dreams, actually, in terms of being able to achieve the style of wine that we wanted to achieve. And a lot of it has to do with obviously working with the same team for the last, more or less the same team. Obviously, there's been transitions between the teams, but there's always been continuity, understanding each other, understanding the palettes, each other's palettes, and getting to the kind of blend that gives us what we desire from an Epicurean point of view, which is aromatic harmony, complexity, and longevity, and elegance. So all these wines start to show that. And obviously, the 2015 is a really, really superb vintage coming out of the Epicurean set. We've just released actually the 2017, which unfortunately we don't have here. But the whole idea is most people don't get to experience wine as it should be had. Most people experience red wine when it's 2 or 3 years old because the holding costs are quite high. So we kind of provide a private cellar for people to drink wine as it should be drunk, and that's really our intention.
You and I both have a dinner to attend, which is kicking off in a couple of moments. So we don't have too much longer before the show runs out. But I do want to ask you very quickly, some 30-year-old Chateau Libertas is beautiful. Some Bordeaux style of wine, but with your own particular flourish and a very welcome flourish. The other wine we've been talking about with Bubbles Ferreira on the show is the Graham Beck, the story, the link to Madiba, to Barack Obama, and the Cuvée Clive, which now sits at the pinnacle. You are somebody who has visited and appreciated wine from all over the world. For you, how close is our top cup classique getting to the very best of champagne? Do we compete in that bracket now?
I like to see them as different categories. I'm a great admirer of Pieter Ferreira's style of winemaking, and it's a really, really superb quality right at the top from a quality point of view. But I wouldn't compare that to champagne. I think they're two different categories. Peter, I missed your earlier discussion, but I'd like to see them in separate boxes. But from a quality point of view, absolutely up there with the best champagnes in the world.
A very diplomatic answer from someone who's worked with some of the finest politicians, albeit making wine rather than talking politics. Let's go back very quickly to other two guests. Benny, I'm going to ask you a very specific question. You heard Mukle talk about the 1928 that he opened over breakfast the other day on a Tuesday, because that's how things work when you're Mukle Mogase. All the vintage, and you and I have tried some super stuff together over the years. Is there still a particular vintage of a particular wine that the mere mention of has you quivering in your velvet slippers?
I just want to say good evening to Mutle. Nice to see you on the show. And congratulations on the 67 today. Dan, maybe we should have a show one night when you invite people who can remember very well wines that have made their journey in the wine world something special. I have been very privileged to have been in South Africa in some of the older cellars that we have wines, as I spoke earlier about the 1940 Chateau Libertas. There are others as well, beautiful old South African wines. Obviously, we don't have the storage capacity where some of our earlier wines were stored. So one has to go back to your experience in Europe in particular. And just as a quick memory, there are just two wines that always will stand out as very special wines to me. The one is a Burgundy that was served to me and Peter Devereaux when we were together in Burgundy for the Hospice de Beaune auction. That was a 1923 Burgundy. All I can remember is that the silkiness and the flavor and the fruit of the wine stayed on my palate. I didn't even think of brushing my teeth that night when I went to bed. I just wanted to taste that wine still the whole night. And then there was a 1912 Riesling from the Rheingau that gave me the same shivers, the balance between sweetness and acidity and the youthfulness of the wine. Those are wines that are much older than me. And once you drink something of that age and it brings to memory all those special moments, and also the company that you shared drinking those wines, that makes it even more special. And then I had the opportunity of drinking a very fine 1945 Chateau Margaux with Paul Pontalia, a man that I admired very much also for the role that he played in South Africa in our own industry. and a delightful winemaker and a guy that had so much passion. And that 45 Margot will always remain in my memory as one of the richest and most elegant wines at the same time, at an age when it was well over 60 years. So yeah, we have those great moments that we can remember, and that will be on the palate tonight for sure. You must have a wonderful dinner.
I love that story, Mugle, of the concept of not wanting to brush your teeth because the wine is just so good. A quick word for you, Bubbles, before we say goodbye to you, and we raise a toast as you look at where we are today. You've done so much in the wine industry. You've given us so much joy through the Bubbles in particular, for which Graham Beck are now so known around the world. What is it out of all of this Graham Beck story that is so intertwined with the Pieter Ferreira story that gives you the most joy as you look back at it?
It is really when I wake up every morning and my feet hits the ground and I know I'm alive, I do celebrate with a glass of Bubbles. That is no lie. To our politician in the room, to Mutle, it's really great to see you. I understand that he sees it in two categories. I now speak for Champagne and Cap Classique. But you know what? I've made peace with that because I respect Champagne for what it really is. It is the ultimata for any winemaker in the world. It's the aspiration that drives us. But if you don't want to do Champagne on the day, Graham Beck should be on your wish list. So it's really great. I would like to just again reiterate the importance of celebrating a remarkable 30 years of democracy. And to Nelson, I raise my glass.
There we go. Thank you. But the only thing I will do is just tweak that ever so slightly, in that if you can't get hold of a bottle of Graham Beck, then some champagne might do the job as an alternative. We'll have to have you back on the show soon, because I think there's some new vintages hovering about, which we look forward to trying and celebrating. But for the rest of the evening, we've got some good wine to drink, some good memories to cherish in South Africa, and some glasses to raise amongst friends. So thank you for the cameo on the show. It always sends our numbers soaring, and we're most appreciative of it. 2015 is drinking beautifully. 2014 awaits us upstairs. Thank you for joining me on the show. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Well, that wraps us up for Dan Really Likes Wine with Norman Goodfellows for this week. A very special edition of the show from the River Club at the Give Back For Mandela Day, raising money for local communities and remembering the extraordinary legacy of Nelson Mandela, which, as you will have learned through the course of the show this evening, has a touch of wine to it as well. A big thank you not just to Mutle, but to Benny Howard, our very first Cape Wine Master, and to the brilliant Pieter Ferreira, whose love of bubbles is infectious. Thank you for joining us on the show. We'll see you back again with the magazine show on Thursday. Have a great week and find something good to celebrate with on Thursday. That legacy of Madiba deserves it. Goodbye.